I had a lot of doubts because of how much, she even told her, oh my gosh, your dad, I mean, he was great, he's my idol, and blah, blah, blah. And I just felt like, wow,
Priscilla Presley has heard the questions for years, but the Bob Joyce theory has never disappeared. Bob Joyce is a pastor from Arkansas whose voice has been compared to Elvis Presley by fans who believe the similarity is impossible to ignore. Now, attention is turning back to Priscilla Presley, who knew Elvis personally. Her connection to him makes this mystery even more intriguing. But what did Priscilla Presley say when she was finally asked about Bob Joyce? Join us to find out. The Bob Joyce Theory. The Bob Joyce theory has been discussed for years, and it continues to attract attention from Elvis Presley fans around the world. At the center of the theory is Bob Joyce, a pastor from Arkansas, whose singing voice has been compared closely with Elvis Presley's. For many listeners, the comparison is difficult to ignore. Millions of people have heard side-by-side recordings of Elvis and Bob Joyce. They listen for the smallest details in their voices, from the tone to the way certain words are sung. Some listeners believe the voices sound so similar that they cannot hear a clear difference. The theory becomes even more interesting because Bob Joyce has never publicly claimed to be Elvis Presley. He has not presented himself as Elvis, and he has not openly used the theory to build a career around the resemblance. Instead, he has continued his work as a pastor and has sung gospel music, a style of music closely connected with Elvis's early life. That has made the discussion more curious. People have traveled across the country to his church to hear him sing. Visitors have listened to him and compared what they heard with recordings of Elvis. Many are longtime Elvis fans who know his voice extremely well. After hearing Bob Joyce, some have become convinced that the two voices are far too similar to dismiss. But a voice alone cannot prove that two people are the same person. Similar voices can happen, and hearing a familiar sound can also make comparisons seem stronger. The Bob Joyce theory remains a theory, not an established fact. The story became even more intriguing when attention turned toward Priscilla Presley, Elvis's former wife. She knew Elvis closely and experienced his life in a way that few people ever could. Because of that, any response connected to Bob Joyce attracted attention. Those who support the theory have continued to study recordings and compare voices. Those who reject it see the similarities as just that, similarities. So what did she say? Let's find out. What Priscilla Presley really said. Something about the Bob Joyce theory continues to pull people back in. For years, Elvis Presley fans have listened to recordings of Bob Joyce, an Arkansas pastor whose voice has been compared with Elvis. Some believe the similarity is remarkable. Others hear nothing more than a familiar sound. But the theory became even more interesting when attention turned to Priscilla Presley, the woman who knew Elvis personally. The idea spreading online was that Priscilla had been asked about Bob Joyce and had given an answer that left the door open to the possibility that Elvis was still alive. According to the story, her response was not a simple yes or no. Instead, it was presented as something much more personal, something connected to Elvis himself and the life he wanted. That version of the story suggests that Priscilla understood why some people wanted to believe Elvis had survived. After all, Elvis had lived under enormous public attention. His name was everywhere, his face was everywhere, and millions of people wanted something from him. The theory suggests that perhaps the person behind the famous name wanted a life far away from all of it. This is where the story takes a more emotional turn. The claim presents Priscilla as someone who understood the difference between Elvis Presley, the superstar, and Elvis, the private man. Fame gave him almost everything a performer could want, but also took away much of his privacy. The story connects that desire for privacy to Bob Joyce, whose voice and gospel singing have been compared to Elvis. Supporters point to the sound and style, but these similarities do not establish that Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley. The most important part of the story, however, is the claim about Priscilla. Online versions of the story have suggested that she understood why people wanted Elvis to still be alive. They describe her as recognizing the love behind the theory, rather than simply treating it as something foolish. That idea has made the story spread even further. For longtime Elvis fans, the possibility can be difficult to separate from the man they remember. Elvis passed away at the age of 42 in 1977, but his image never disappeared. His music continued to reach new generations, and his name remained part of popular culture. That lasting fame helped create an environment where theories about his death could survive for decades. Yet, there is an important problem with the story surrounding Priscilla and Bob Joyce. The dramatic claims circulating online have not been supported by reliable evidence. In fact, Priscilla has publicly rejected the broader idea that Elvis is still alive. In a 2025 interview, she addressed the continuing rumors and said she wished Elvis were still alive. That makes the viral version of the Bob Joyce story very different from what the evidence supports. The online claim suggests that Priscilla left the possibility open. Her documented public comments point in the opposite direction. She has spoken about Elvis as someone who passed away and about the grief that followed his death. Still, the theory refuses to disappear. Perhaps that is because Bob Joyce gives the old Elvis story a new face, and, more importantly, a familiar voice. Fans can hear the comparison for themselves and decide what they think. Some hear an extraordinary resemblance. Others hear a pastor whose voice happens to remind them of one of the most famous singers in history. And that leaves the Bob Joyce theory in the same place it has occupied for years. There is a voice that keeps attracting attention. There are fans who remain convinced. There are recordings that continue to be compared. And there is a story about Priscilla that has grown far beyond what can actually be proven. The mystery may be entertaining, but the difference between a theory and a fact matters. Priscilla Presley did know Elvis better than almost anyone outside his immediate family. Her memories of him carry real weight, but that does not make every claim placed in her name true. The woman closest to Elvis. Priscilla was not simply someone who knew Elvis. She was his wife and the mother of his only child, Lisa Marie Presley. Because of her close connection to him, she has remained one of the most important people connected to his story. Her life has also been closely linked to preserving Elvis's memory and protecting the legacy he left behind. That is why her name appears so often whenever questions about Elvis return. Priscilla is not known for building her life around wild theories about Elvis. She has spent decades speaking about his life, his career, and the years they shared. She has also remained closely connected to Graceland, the Memphis home that became one of the most important places associated with Elvis. Because of that, some people find it difficult to believe that she would encourage a theory claiming Elvis secretly survived his death. From their point of view, Priscilla would have every reason to reject such an idea. Her connection to Elvis is personal, but his legacy is also a major part of the public world surrounding his name. She has helped preserve that legacy while dealing with endless attention from fans and the media. This is where the Bob Joyce theory tries to make Priscilla part of the mystery. Supporters of the theory have suggested that she could have simply rejected the idea and ended the discussion. Instead, they claim, she responded with understanding and left people wondering what she really believed. But there is an important difference between what the theory claims and what can actually be established. Priscilla has not confirmed that Elvis survived. She has not provided reliable evidence that Bob Joyce is Elvis. In fact, she has publicly spoken about Elvis as someone who passed away in 1977. She has also addressed the continuing rumors that he might still be alive. So why does her name carry so much weight? It is because Priscilla knew Elvis in a way most people never could. Fans knew the performer. They knew the songs, the movies, the famous clothes, and the public image. Priscilla knew the person behind that image. She spent years close to him, during both the great moments of his career and the difficult periods of his personal life. She knew the man away from the stage and cameras. That does not make every theory about Elvis true. It does, however, explain why people pay close attention whenever Priscilla discusses him. The Bob Joyce theory depends heavily on the idea that Elvis wanted a private life. Supporters believe that fame became too much for him, and that he may have wanted to escape public attention. But wanting privacy is not proof that someone secretly disappeared. The difference is important. Priscilla's place in this story comes from her history with Elvis, not from evidence that she supports the theory. She remains an important voice when discussing his life, because she was there for parts of it that fans could only see from a distance. Many other theories have gone dark, but this one still stands. Why? Let's dive in. Why the Bob Joyce theory refuses to disappear. Supporters do not believe it survives only because fans miss Elvis. They point to what they describe as evidence, especially the striking similarity between Bob Joyce's voice and the voice of Elvis Presley. At the center of the theory is Bob Joyce, a pastor from Arkansas. He does not present himself as Elvis Presley, and he does not appear to live like someone connected to the world of celebrity. There are no famous outfits, no stage performances, and no public show built around his appearance. He looks like an ordinary pastor who has spent years serving his church. That is part of what makes the theory so interesting to the people who believe it. Bob Joyce does not look much like Elvis. His appearance does not immediately remind people of the famous singer. He does not walk around trying to create an Elvis image, and there is no obvious attempt to copy the man who became one of the biggest stars in music history. Then he sings. For listeners who believe the theory, this is where everything changes. They hear a voice that reminds them strongly of Elvis. They point to the tone, the way certain notes are held, the vibrato, and the small changes in the voice while singing. To them, these details sound familiar enough to make the comparison difficult to ignore. This is also where the theory makes its biggest claim. Some versions of the story have said that audio professionals or engineers compared recordings of Elvis with recordings of Bob Joyce and found an extraordinary level of similarity. However, there is no reliable evidence establishing that professional testing has proved the two voices belong to the same person. A voice comparison can show similarities, but it cannot prove that Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley. That distinction is important. A talented singer can develop a voice that resembles another performer. People can also naturally share similar vocal qualities. The human voice has many features that can overlap, especially when two singers use related musical styles. Still, supporters of the Bob Joyce theory believe the resemblance goes beyond ordinary similarity. They point out that Joyce does not appear to be performing an Elvis act. He preaches and sings as part of his religious work. His performances are not presented as Elvis shows, and he has not built his public identity around the comparison. That detail has become one of the strongest parts of the theory for those who believe it. If someone wanted to pretend to be Elvis Presley, supporters argue, there would seem to be obvious reasons to make money from it. Elvis remains one of the most recognizable names in music, and millions of people continue to be interested in his life and career. Yet Bob Joyce has not publicly presented himself as Elvis. He has continued as a pastor instead. He has not built his church around Elvis Presley. He has not turned the theory into a public entertainment act. He has not openly encouraged people to treat him as the former music star. Instead, he has continued to identify himself as Bob Joyce and to focus on preaching. That does not prove the theory. But for people who already believe something unusual is happening, it makes the mystery harder for them to dismiss. Another reason the theory continues is the reaction of people who hear Joyce sing in person. Some visitors have traveled long distances because they want to hear the voice for themselves. Many are serious Elvis fans who have spent years listening to his recordings. These listeners believe they recognize something familiar. They compare the sound of Joyce's voice with different periods of Elvis's career. They listen to old recordings and then listen to Joyce. Some believe the similarities are so strong that they cannot explain them as simple imitation. Others reach the opposite conclusion. They hear a pastor with a similar vocal style and see no evidence connecting him to Elvis Presley. For them, the comparison may be interesting, but it does not change the historical record. That is the central problem with the theory. The voice may sound similar, but similarity is not identity. There is also no reliable evidence showing that Elvis Presley secretly became Bob Joyce. Elvis passed away in 1977, and the official historical record supports his death. Bob Joyce has lived publicly as a pastor and has not claimed to be Elvis. But what does this theory really stand for? Stick around. Behind the Bob Joyce theory. This is where the Bob Joyce theory takes a deeper turn, because it is no longer only about a voice. Supporters connect the theory to the idea that Elvis Presley wanted to escape the enormous pressure that came with being Elvis Presley. They imagine a man who wanted a quieter life, away from cameras, crowds, and constant attention. From that point of view, Bob Joyce's simple life in Arkansas can appear to fit the story perfectly. In this version of the theory, Bob Joyce is not seen as someone pretending to be Elvis. He is imagined as a man who once lived as Elvis and then chose a completely different life. Instead of performing for huge crowds, he sings in a church. Instead of living in the center of the entertainment world, he lives away from it. Instead of being surrounded by people who wanted something from Elvis, he became a pastor whose life was centered on faith and his congregation. Supporters also point to the timeline, although it does not prove anything. Bob Joyce became known in Arkansas after Elvis Presley passed away in 1977. Arkansas is also relatively close to Memphis, where Elvis lived and built much of his career. For people already searching for connections, those details can seem important because they fit the story they want to believe. Then there is the question of why anyone would want to disappear in the first place. Elvis had fame, money, success, and millions of fans. But those things did not mean he had complete freedom. His entire life was watched closely, and his private struggles became part of public discussion. The idea of leaving everything behind and choosing a quiet life, therefore, becomes an important part of the Bob Joyce theory. But this is where the theory must be separated from reality. There is no reliable evidence showing that Elvis secretly disappeared and became Bob Joyce. There is also no established evidence proving that Priscilla Presley believed Elvis had done this. Her understanding of Elvis does not turn the theory into fact, and a similar voice cannot establish a person's identity. For people who already believe the theory, however, the story carries a different meaning. They do not see Priscilla's comments as proof that Elvis survived. Instead, they see them as an acknowledgement that the pressure surrounding Elvis was real, and that wanting privacy was understandable. That distinction matters because understanding why someone might want a private life is not the same as confirming that the person secretly created a new identity. The story also says something about the lasting impact of Elvis Presley. He passed away in 1977 at the age of 42, yet his name never disappeared. His music continued, his image remained famous, and his life continued to attract questions. For many fans, the sudden end of such a huge career was difficult to accept. That may help explain why theories about Elvis survived for so long. People were not only searching for an answer about what happened to him, some were also searching for a different ending to a story that had become much bigger than one man's life. The idea of Elvis quietly living somewhere else offers that different ending, even though there is no reliable evidence that it happened. And that is what the Bob Joyce theory ultimately means. It is not proof that Elvis Presley survived, and it is not a confirmed explanation of his death. It is a theory built around a remarkable voice, a mysterious comparison, and the idea that a man overwhelmed by fame might have wanted another life. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.